Well, welcome everyone. We've got a great session tonight. I'm Victor Menasce, one of the partners here at Y Street Capital. We're going to be talking about the use of AI to validate construction. You don't have to be a general contractor to be interested in this because, in fact, everyone I know has received a quote at one point in time or another. And of course, the difficulty is in knowing, is that a fair price? You might get multiple quotes and you might say, well, this one's high, this one's low, I'll pick the one in the middle. Well, maybe they're all wrong. Maybe you want to negotiate. Maybe the guy picked a high number because he's expecting you to negotiate. And if your only tool for negotiation is to twist their arm, that's a little bit of a blunt instrument. And so there's, at least in my experience, a little bit more of an art and a science to that entire process, where you definitely want to look at the scope of what is being requested, look at the scope of what's being quoted, and see if in fact there's a mismatch. Because oftentimes when there is a gap, it's the result of a mismatch of expectations, maybe an error in estimating, a misunderstanding in specifications. And construction is so much more technical than it once was. This is no longer an industry of just hiring two guys in a pickup truck and they go to the lumber store and get to work. It's not like that at all anymore. Construction is extraordinarily technical. And so even understanding what's being quoted from a technical perspective, does the product meet the specifications? That will play a major role in the costing of a project. So let's dive right in. This is going to be lots of fun. Okay, so we will start with the slideshow here, slideshow from start. And I believe you should be seeing the slide presentation. Okay, so this is the base question. How much should this cost? And it's very difficult to know. So what do we do? Well, we're developers at Y Street Capital. We build apartments, senior housing, flex industrial, storage. We have a lot of land in our development pipeline, close to 2,000 acres of land in our construction pipeline. I also host the Real Estate Espresso podcast, a daily show 7 days a week. I think we published episode 3,150 something this week. I've been doing this a little while. And it's really your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. So if you're not a listener to the show, love to have you as a listener as well. And we're going to go through a few examples here. So imagine that you're working on a particular project. I've got an example here of a 240 unit apartment project, just to give you some metrics. The architectural drawings consist of 80 pages. It's actually a little bit light for that size of project. These days, I would expect more than that. The structural drawings are 41 pages. Mechanical drawings are only 15 pages. The electrical drawings are 60 pages. The plumbing drawings are 45. The civil drawings are 35 pages. And the specification, the manual for this project, that talks in horrible detail about everything from windows to door frames to fire stairs, to you name it. All of that is written up. Those specifications are in that document. So when you go to get something quoted, you essentially need to provide all of this information. And then what comes back, they put it out to tender. The value, of course, is not created by the general contractor. They're not doing the work. They go out and get a bunch of subcontractors. And it's the subs that generate the value. On a typical scope, there could be 17 to 20 different subcontractors on a project. Could be more, but it's usually in that range. And they're going to put it out to bid, usually to at least three folks. They'll want to get at least 3 bids back per scope. So minimum, they're managing 60 conversations just to put the tendering together. And by the way, whether you're building a 240 unit complex like I'm showing here, or a single family home, you're still going to have somewhere between 17 to 20 subs. So the amount of effort to tender a project, whether it's a single residential home or a larger project like this, is almost the same. It's almost the same. Now, on a single family home, you're not going to have a 600-page spec document, but still a lot of conversations to manage. So you get a quote, and it's going to have a bunch of details about it. And oftentimes there'll just be a number at the bottom saying, here's the price. And what do you do with that? What questions do you ask? Uh, if you like the number, do you ask questions? If you don't like the number, do you ask questions? What questions should you ask? Sometimes you'll get something that's a little bit more detailed where they'll break it down by division and tell you, this is much as going into concrete and this much into windows and so much in roofing and doors and so on. And you can get that detailed breakdown. So now you can start to dig into the individual scope and see, is that appropriate? But even then, okay, take something like this, $2 million for plumbing. If you divide that by 240 units, is that a good price per unit based on the number of fixtures? It's still a fairly blunt instrument in terms of determining is what you're being quoted a fair price. So the key to achieving this is to really drill in. When you're dealing with numbers of any scale, even a single family home is expensive. A project like this is very expensive. Either way, the time that you put in to determining whether that quote is fair is worth its weight in gold. If I can, on a $30 million project, if I can save $1 million or $2 or $3, is that worth a couple of days of my time to figure that out? Absolutely. Absolutely. And how often do we simply get busy and not put in that time and effort? Now, in the good old days, we would have done this using material takeoff software, which is extremely labor intensive. To do the material takeoff on a project of this size would, it's probably a couple of weeks worth of work to really do this and do it well, measure all the dimensions, get all the unit counts of doors and electrical fixtures and light fixtures and window blinds, and count all those quantities, create this massive database is a lot of work. It's just plain a lot of work. And that's just the starting point. Then you got to get a material database to determine what do those quantities of materials cost. And then how much is it going to cost to install those materials? There are tables, for example, if you've got masonry, how many bricks can a bricklayer lay in an hour? And what's the cost of a bricklayer? And you can figure out what average production should be. Same thing for flooring and drywall and all the various trades. You can get those industry metrics so that you can determine, is what you're being quoted in the right range. But again, it's managing a massive volume of data. I'm going to show you a quote that we got. This is on a much smaller project. This is a 20-unit building, and the area. I mean, this was originally a single-family home, tiny lot, and the quote from the subcontractor for the dirt work, which means excavation, backfill, and site servicing. So that means pulling the utilities, doing a road cut, pulling utilities from the other side of the street. The quote was $480,900 plus tax. And apart from the sticker shock of saying, my gosh, that seems high, how would you negotiate this? Is it like, is it just the wrong subcontractor? Their overheads are too high? What's wrong with this number? And how do you even figure that out? So you would start with some metrics. You would look at, for example, the machine time. If you had to excavate pretty much the entire site with a 20-ton excavator, it's 20 hours on the worst day ever. Even if you double it, and even if you pick the top end of the range for machine time at $250 an hour, you're looking at $5,000. Okay, double it, call it 10 grand. Fine. If you're looking at exporting all of that material, it's 1,000 yards of material. Okay, so that's 48 truckloads at 500 a load. Okay, that's 24 grand. Even if you double it, there's no way you can get to $480,000 if you try and reverse engineer the numbers to reconstruct that quote. There's just no way you can get there. And that starts with knowing your numbers. And that's a real quote from a reputable dirt work contractor, top tier contractor, very well known. They gave us an unbelievably high quote. And oftentimes people will just say, oh, okay, I'll accept that. The other challenge, of course, is in comparing, you get different quotes from different subcontractors, is in comparing apples to apples. And oftentimes this quote will have one list of exclusions and inclusions. And then this other quote will have a different list of inclusions and exclusions, such that you cannot actually even comparison shop because they're not quoting the same thing. So you have to go through a process of what's called leveling the quotes to determine what is actually a fair comparison. And that requires a lot of detailed work as well. Then you get into the types of contracts. What type of contract are you getting? Is it a time and material contract? Is it a lump sum bid with an upset price? Is it a guaranteed maximum price, which means who is carrying the contingency, because there has to be contingency? Is it purely a construction management contract where the owner hires the subs and the CM, the construction manager, is only project managing? There's all different styles of contracts. And the risk to you, of course, is to pick a bid that might be the low bid. You sign the contract and then they kill you with change orders. The picture here in the background is a real life project. It's much closer to completion than shown in this picture. And every time I drive by that site, I almost want to vomit. That particular contractor has escalated the price on this building by $29 million. And that was, and maybe it's higher now, but that was the last that I heard. These things happen in real life. And it just makes me sick to my stomach to see these types of things happen. It is a common practice in the industry to make a low bid and then change order you to death. And you want to prevent that from happening. One of the best ways you can do that is by gaining clarity on what the bid represents, because then you have a foundation to argue from. And if that particular contractor knows that you are paying attention and that you have dug into the details and they're not going to pull a fast one over you, they're going to be they may decline the work. In that case, that's a good thing because you don't want that contractor. Or they're going to recognize that they're being watched and they're not going to get away with these types of games. So either way, it's always in your best interest to get to this level of detail. Okay, so in order to validate an estimate, and you're not here to duplicate the work of the GC, but you need to duplicate enough of it that you can have a peer level conversation with them. So number one, you need to extract the quantities of materials that are required in the project. Then you need an estimate of those material costs. You need an estimate of the labor and an estimate of the labor costs. You need really those four things. Now, you're never going to be able to get it to the same level of detail that a high quality general contractor does. But if you can get close enough and you have enough tools at your disposal to ask probing questions, you're going to have a much better time negotiating all of your contracts. And again, it doesn't matter the scale of the project. You might be just installing a swimming pool in your backyard. Everything I'm describing here, that same process applies. It doesn't matter what the project is. AI has gotten much, much better at reading drawings. If I go back beginning of the year, we could not have this conversation that we're having today. The AI tools simply were not good enough to read through a drawing and do it credibly. It's too complex. There's too much detail. There's too much information that is cross-referenced from one drawing to another. You might have a particular dimension on the drawing, but then it references a detail that's 20 pages away, and so you have to go reference that detail and then come back. There's a level of complexity that AI simply was not able to handle. Today, that's changed. And what I'm going to show you today is relatively simple. I'm going to walk you through the process of doing something that maybe in the past you might have done manually. And this particular drawing is the one that I used as a base case. This is the third floor of a 6-story building. Yeah, and the very first thing that I did is I asked the AI tool to give me the length of the perimeter walls, the exterior walls, then the demising walls, and then the interior walls. And so I did that starting with the third floor. And here's what it gave me it gave me those dimensions. Now, here in Canada, we do things in the metric system. So it converted all of those measurements that were in millimeters to meters and then to feet and inches. So it gave me the dimensions of the exterior walls on each side. If I go back to the drawing here, you'll see that there are grid lines with letters and numbers, and there are dimensions between those grid lines. So you can actually add up those numbers. It's a fairly standard way of measuring things and showing dimensions, and simply by lining up those grid lines with the various features on the drawing. So the AI tool was able to read the drawing, reference those measurements on the grid lines, and then make the appropriate judgments, including, by the way, you can see that there in this center wall here near the hallway, there's a little alcove here. There's actually a washer dryer tucked into that wall. And it was able to figure out that, yes, that's a perimeter, that's a demising wall between units, and I need to include that calculation in the demising wall. Now, not all of that was demising wall, because some of it actually is a wall with the shared with the hallway. So it had to make that distinction as well. What's the wall between apartments and what's the wall between the apartment and the common area? So it was able to do that. And I'm going to show you in a moment exactly how it did that. So it gave me all of the calculations. And I did this starting with a very simple process saying, give me the exterior walls, give me the demising walls, so that I could literally go through and validate the work, verify that it was making the calculations correctly. It's one of these things I did early on a Saturday morning. Did not take very long, by the way. And I'll take you through the commands that produce this result. So then went from there to the areas for the walls in the common area, the elevator shaft, the fire escapes, and then the interior partition. So walls between, let's say, bedroom and closet, bedroom and bathroom. All of those interior walls are also part of the calculation. And you want to look at those all independently, because the construction of an interior wall is different from an exterior wall, and it's different from a demising wall. So it gave me all of those things that we were looking for. And then it provided the information of how it actually did the work. So if you remember back to your grade school, if your math teachers wouldn't be satisfied just with the answer, they would have said, show your work. And so the AI tool shows its work. It says, here's how I came up with those numbers. And so it provides that information. And then it also provided a number of observations. So, for example, it determined some things about, some of the observations it made from the drawings. That's also useful information when it comes to figuring out, did it do the analysis correctly? So definitely want to read through all this. For example, on the balconies, on the very top floor, it looked at the unit 601, 602. These are west-facing balconies. 603 and 604 are just a Juliet balcony, which means essentially a patio door with a railing. It's not a full balcony, and it was able to make those observations. So it really tells you how it's making these calculations, which is extremely, extremely useful. So here's how we got to that. And then, so I did the third floor, then I did the very top floor. I then asked it to produce the area calculations as well for the balconies, the gross footprint of the building for each floor. Is the floor area the same as the ceiling? Hopefully it is. Turns out that it is. That's a good thing. How much area is lost to wall thickness? How much area is lost to the elevator shaft and to the stairways? You typically subtract half of the area for a stairway. And then it gave a net area for the building. It gave a gross area and a net area. So all of these are very useful measurements. So then, of course, all of this was done using the tools from Anthropic. It's the tool called Claude Cowork. It's an application that runs both on the Mac and on the Windows platform. It turns out I usually work on a Mac. I happen to have done this one on the Windows platform. And this is literally the prompt that I gave it. And it's a very simple prompt. I said, you're estimating the materials for constructing a building. As a first step, extract the framing measurements for each wall from the construction drawing. The measurements are in metric dimensions, convert them to imperial. For now, count the length of the exterior walls, the length of the demising walls between apartments, and count the length of the interior walls within each apartment, and then put out that result in an Excel spreadsheet. And it went off and did it. So that was step number one. Step number two, I said, okay, now that you've done that, include the walls for the stairs, for the elevator shaft, the fire hose cabinets, and the utility shafts. So it then went into the common area and added that to the apartments. So it then made those calculations, added that to the Excel spreadsheet. So you can see I went through this in a fairly systematic fashion. So I wanted to be able to validate its calculations each step along the way. There's no point in saying, here, give me all the dimensions of the building and have it run for an hour and then have garbage come back. So I really wanted to see, could it do even a decent job on a simple request? And then I kept layering on more and more complexity. Then I said, okay, now add the area for the floor framing, the ceiling framing in a separate section, calculate the floor area lost to wall thickness for exterior and demising walls. And then I said, subtract the area for the elevator shaft and half of the area for the stairway. So every step of the way, I just kept adding more layers of complexity. And it is what produced that result that I shared with you a moment ago in an Excel spreadsheet. Then I said, okay, add the balconies. And now when it did the balconies, it made a mistake because it treated the balcony area the same as enclosed space. So I said, no, don't do that. You should treat the balconies as projections instead of as a recess. So amend the floor and ceiling areas accordingly, treat the balconies as projections, and keep the enclosed space as part of the gross floor area. Don't treat the balcony area as part of the building. Treat it as a projection. So it went and did that. It modified all of the calculations accordingly. And then I said, okay, so now that you figured that out for the third floor, do it for the top floor of the building, and then treat the third floor as a typical floor for levels 2, 3, 4, and 5, and assemble the entire building together using the third floor, which you just did as a typical floor, representing the remainder of the floors, and the top floor. So now that's going to give us the entire building. I'm neglecting for the moment the ground floor, which is different, but for the purpose of this exercise, we're just looking at the residential floors in this particular building. And so that was the process. This entire scope of work honestly took well under an hour on a Saturday morning on a project that's not a huge project. I mean, this is construction wise is maybe $4 or $5 million project. It's not a massive project. But still, if you can save some money, if you want to validate the construction scope, this is time that's absolutely well spent. The next thing you need to do, of course, to translate this from a material takeoff, because that's all we've done here is a material takeoff, and we haven't looked at all of the other elements, like we haven't counted the number of doors and windows and electrical fixtures and all these other things. We're just looking at framing today. We're keeping it fairly simple. Next thing you need to do is produce a material database. So I'm going to take you through a simple step. And again, I gave this over to Claude, to Anthropic, and this is precisely the quote that I gave it. I said, I'm looking to create a database of flooring costs for multi-story residential apartment building. Here's where the building is located. It's about 15,000 square feet. The net floor area is 12,530. And you want to assume that the entire net floor area is going to require vinyl plank flooring with a high quality, high durability flooring in those common areas that represent 30% of the building, and then a medium quality strip flooring for the residential apartment. I'd like you to research 5 different LVT flooring products that include at least a minimum 2 millimeter flexible membrane on the bottom, provide a little bit of rubber cushioning, and then create a database for those products, including the source and the SKU numbers, and please put that out in Excel. So that was literally what I asked it to do. And it took about 6 minutes to produce this. And this was the result that it produced. The first thing that it did is it gave me the area calcs. So it said, I'm going to put 30% of that area in that high quality flooring. So this is the area that I need. And then medium quality flooring for the residential units is the 8,700 square feet for the total square footage. So it did the area calcs. Then it produced a preliminary cost estimate, and it researched, my goodness, probably 30 different suppliers. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that it put the pricing in US dollars. I asked it to be done in Canada. It said I couldn't find the right suppliers. And then, as you can see here, it found pricing for one product, but then everything else was contact supplier. It got me no pricing at all. So this is a fail. This did not get me the result I was looking for. And I'm showing you a failure because sometimes a simple request results in a failure. So how did I refine the request? Is I then went back and I said, okay, we're sourcing the material in Ottawa, Canada. Research the products that are available from Rona.ca or homedepot.ca. We need pricing in Canadian dollars. Now, when it went to Rona, which used to be Lowe's, it was purchased by another supplier or another company. They could not get that number. They couldn't get the quantities. And it's not because they couldn't get the pricing, but they couldn't find the product that had that minimum 2 millimeter thickness. The ones that they had only had a 1 millimeter pad. And so they couldn't confirm the specs or the pricing. So it completely punted on the product that was available from Rona. It then went to Home Depot and said, okay, Home Depot Canada has exactly what you need. It then produced a database of the products. And in literally about 5 minutes, it went through Home Depot. It gave me 5 different products with pricing, how many cases would be required, the number of quantities, a few different, choices, and then a total price in this case, including a 10% waste factor. So the material cost would be about $65,000 to do this entire building just in terms of material cost. So again, you're not replacing the GC. You might not even source the material from Home Depot. You don't know. But if the GC is giving you a quote for flooring and it's coming in at $18 a square foot, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, I've got pricing here for $4.78 a square foot. LVT flooring can't cost you more than $3 a square foot to install. There's a gap. This is part of the process of going through and validating their estimates. It may not be the exact same product. Maybe you can find the product that they're using and you can get the actual pricing, but you can literally in a few minutes get validation of pricing with the quantities, with the material takeoffs, and get these numbers in ways that you could not some time ago. And then not only did it give me the pricing, it gave me all of the line items, including the SKUs for ordering them if I want to order that particular product. So again, just with that simple prompt, I was able to produce all of this information literally in a few minutes. This was not possible 6 months ago. It simply was not possible 6 months ago. And so for me as a developer working on multiple projects in multiple different jurisdictions, I love the fact that we can dig into the detail and we can validate things in a much more comprehensive way than ever before. I've been involved in projects where in the past, in fact, we were building an RV park in Louisiana, and the electrician had quoted some quantities for electrical cable. And I did the math, and I went back to him and said, why do you have 4 miles of cable in your quote? When I run the numbers for the number of RV pads that we have here, I can't see a need for more than about 1 mile worth of cable. And you've got 4 miles of cable here. Were you planning to return the extra and give us a refund? What was your plan? And it's only by digging into that level of detail that you're able to bring to the surface these types of, maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was hoping to take a bunch of cable home. I have no idea. But you can identify these gaps that seem to occur with alarming regularity. So maybe I'm going to stop there and pause and open for questions. If you have a question, happy to answer it let me see if we go into the Q&A. There's a Q&A button. You can put a question there, and I'm happy to take your questions. One of the questions we often get when we're dealing with contractors has to do with the pricing of the labor component, because there's different wage scales. Are we talking about union labor? Are we talking about folks that have to travel to come and do the job? Sometimes the folks are coming from out of town. You might be working with a subcontractor. For example, one of the contractors that we work with for mechanical all across the United States, a company called Freedom Air out of Houston, and they do work nationally. So, but they do great work. Their pricing is very competitive. Even when you layer on top of that the fact that there's going to be travel and accommodations required for some number of months, they're still very, very competitive. And that also comes down to just hiring the right subcontractors, folks that know how to do this on a large scale. And that needs to be taken into account. You can't just look at the material numbers and say, okay, an air conditioner is $3,500. Why are they charging me $9,000 or $10,000 a unit for mechanical? You need to understand what it is that's required on a larger scale. So what I'm sharing with you is what we do on a daily basis over at Y Street Capital. We have a number of development projects underway within the company, as well as we have a consulting division. So we also have a number of consulting clients that we work with across multiple different geographies. For example, we have a client who, former executive in the auto industry. He was very senior in the Ford Motor Company. He is building multiple apartment buildings, not far from Detroit, Michigan, as it turns out. And we're helping him with that process, first with the feasibility study and now pre-construction and all of the things as the owner's representative, working and hiring the general contractors, validating them, working with the architects to make sure that everything is being done appropriately. So if you have projects that are potentially of interest that you might want to undertake, we may be able to help you. Folks often do hire consultants, let's say a planning consultant, to help you get through zoning. And those folks do great work. The problem, though, is that they are viewing that particular scope through the lens of how am I going to get this zoning approved, which is a different question from what's the highest and best use and what trade-off should I make if I was viewing this through the lens of a developer, which we are and they are not. So there is a difference when you're working with folks that actually have bona fide development experience as compared with folks that might just be a specialist in one narrow area. There is a difference. So let me open it one more time for any questions. Let me share as well, if you want to get in touch, what's the best way to do so. So that's here on the screen. And that is here at Y Street Capital. Email address to get in touch with us is info@ystreetcapital.com. We will be, of course, sharing this information on the recording for folks who could not make the meeting tonight. So then we'd be happy, for folks to get this from the recording as well. Do you have a question, Victor? Do you have a follow-up script for the next conversation that happens when Y Street challenges the quote? That's a great question. So the way that I usually frame that discussion is in fact, I'm going through this right now with two different general contractors. And I literally said this to the CEO of the company last night on the phone. I said, there's a human process where if you like the number, sometimes people are less motivated to ask questions. And if you don't like the number, all of a sudden it undergoes a tremendous amount of scrutiny. But in fact, a high number could be wrong and a low number could be wrong. And both should be exposed to the same level of scrutiny. So we're going to be asking deep questions, not to twist your arm. It's to make sure that we've got the scope right. We may twist our arm later, but we want to make sure we've got the scope right. Because if we don't have that right, then the rest is irrelevant. We want to make sure that we know what we're building. We're aligned on the expectations. This is an exercise in expectation setting. So not only have we got the quantities right, we've got the right quality, we've got the right specs, so that the subcontractor doesn't come back later and say, "Oh, you mean that door needs to be a fire rated door? That's not that's not a $200 door; it's a $2,000 door now." Those types of conversations are conversations you don't want to have. So you want to make sure that you've got the scope right. That's vitally important. And then when it comes to value engineering, you can also start to look at possibilities. So again, we were having this conversation with another general contractor today where, in some jurisdictions, the building code requires you to, for example, have styrofoam insulation under your foundation slab. Well, styrofoam can be expensive. Would it make sense to go buy recycled styrofoam from a flat roofing company and then put that under the foundation? It doesn't have to be beautiful. That would be really the next step. And so you can get into these detailed conversations if you frame the conversation the right way. So it's not really so much a script as it is framing the conversation and creating the conditions that make it possible for both you as the owner and for the general contractor to have that open conversation. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question is, would it make sense as a next step to create a skill base on the process that you just described, or are the projects too different to create a standardized skills? Fabulous question. There are a ton of skills out there, and we have developed some as well. I decided for the purpose of today not to go too deep into skills. So what are, and I have used skills in here, by the way. So what is a skill? A skill is a set of instructions for AI that are repeated, and think of it this way. An AI tool is like a brand new employee, first day on the job. It's got general knowledge, but it knows nothing about your company, knows nothing about you. It lacks the context of what it is that you're having to do. And what a skill is saying, okay, we're going to go through this process, and I want you to remember how you did this. Because if you don't remember how you did this, you're going to relearn it the next time, and you may not do it the same way. And so what a skill serves two purposes. It brings consistency because you take a process that is now proven and tested and make it repeatable. That's number one. And number two, you're not just wasting a whole ton of AI credits on something that you've already taught it how to do once before, and now it's going to have to relearn it each and every time as if it was that brand new employee first day on the job. So skills are a very useful way of, once you have a workflow that is proven and tested, to then capture that in a skill file. Skill files are increasingly interchangeable between CoWork and Claude CoWork and between ChatGPT codecs. So you can often do the same work in both those different tools. They're becoming both very, very similar in terms of what their capabilities are. And so, yes, I absolutely encourage you to look at skills. And there, in the construction industry, there are a lot of skills out there in the public domain. You definitely want to import them, study them, review them, test them before you use them in a production workflow. But they can be extremely powerful. Definitely encourage you to use that. So hopefully that answers that question. Any more questions? Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll wish you a great evening. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on the next webinar. And if you want, oh, we do have a question. I hear you saying by carefully framing the approach, you can be relational going forward rather than confrontational. That's absolutely true. That's exactly right. It, and it's professional. Now, look, sometimes these conversations, these negotiations can get difficult, and certainly in the world of construction, general contractors are not strangers to having those types of difficult negotiations. They're not scared of them at all. They're pretty skilled at firing back with a tough response, and so you as the owner definitely want to not be pushed back on your heels by that kind of a response, and to keep it on a professional level and say, look, I'm not here to, call you dishonest or anything like that. We're just here to make sure that we've got it right, because you're only human. Everybody makes mistakes. We make mistakes. Let's make sure that we are looking at this project the same way. So then it absolutely becomes collaborative rather than confrontational. And I can tell you, because literally we do this every single day of the week. I have multiple of these conversations every day of the week on projects large and small. That this is the way to get to a common understanding and get there quickly, so that you can, at the end of the day, have a contract that you feel comfortable signing, that you feel comfortable signing in front of the lender as a sworn statement of construction, that you're going to personally guarantee a construction loan on, because you're taking on some liability when you sign that piece of paper. So you want to be able to do that with some confidence. And so that, in our experience, that's the way to do it. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, happy to connect. Reach out to us, info@ystreetcapital.com. Happy to help you with your projects, and have a good night, everyone. Cheers. Bye for now.